Two security guards, thinking their hands were strong, lied in court, unaware that their victims had CIA clearance. What followed would turn their whole world upside down. Atlanta was moving with the usual Monday morning hustle, cars speeding by, hurried conversations in the distance, and horns honking nonstop. But amidst the chaos, something was strangely still. People were rushing, yet the city itself seemed frozen, trapped within the web of its daily routine. Jasmine Carter, however, was not in a position to take time for the city's rhythm. She stepped out of her sleek black sedan, her heels echoing a determined rhythm amidst the morning noise. There was no hesitation in her steps, no doubt. Exactly the kind of woman who was meant to be here, in this moment, in this place. She had learned how to wield power and was someone who could make the world bend to her will. Before her stood the Thompson Federal Court. Imposing and majestic, it was mostly depicted as a symbol of justice, or so they said. But Jasmine knew better. Justice didn't often pay a visit here. As Jasmine took a step toward the courthouse, the doors in front of her opened with a firm determination. Once inside, the air in the room felt suffocating. Everyone had taken their place, and the trial seemed ready to begin. Jasmine moved forward without anything standing in her way in the center of the room. Without hesitation, she took her position and calmly stared into the eyes of everyone present. No one here could oppose her. She was aware of everything, right from the beginning. The atmosphere in the courtroom was no longer one of justice always prevailing. It was just a mundane routine. The people here had learned not to judge, but to take away people's lives, their rights. But Jasmine knew every dark corner of this system and understood that justice would never pass through here. Everything had changed that morning with the moment she had with the police officers. The officers, trying to follow the rhythm of the city, had wanted to see Jasmine as just an ordinary person, but she was not ordinary. She was a woman several steps ahead. Her job had taught her the value of understanding how precious she was and who she was within the city's chaos. Jasmine Carter was one of the most valuable experts in federal security investigations. That morning, when she was stopped by security officers, she realized everything was about to change. On her way to the trial, she had been arrested by two officers on false charges. But Jasmine knew one thing. She knew exactly what the games being played were and where they would lead. The disdain in the eyes of the security officers didn't anger her. They treated every suspect the same way. But Jasmine was going to play a game no one had ever witnessed before. She was not an ordinary person. In her bag, she had files that could turn a current case and everything related to the FBI upside down. And most importantly, she had an identity she didn't have to explain to anyone. Slowly, she pulled out her file and handed it to the officer. In that moment, the expressions on the security officers' faces quickly changed. They didn't know Jasmine's true identity, but once they found out, everything would change. Jasmine had CIA clearance. At that moment, with her small, deceptive power, everything would be turned upside down. Within minutes, Jasmine was left alone, seeing the indecision in the eyes of the officers. They were still accusing her, doing everything they could to disrespect this honorable woman. But Jasmine responded calmly. Yes, in situations like this, you don't have much. But Jasmine was going to send shivers down everyone's spine with her power and self-confidence in that moment. Then everything progressed rapidly. As the tension increased, time in the courtroom seemed to freeze. When Jasmine entered the court, she was ready to experience that moment. Everyone's eyes in the courtroom were beginning to understand the opportunities they had missed with every word of the trial. The trial had begun, but there was no target for Jasmine. She had always focused on the bigger picture. She could see the officers' faces tense as they watched Jasmine's calm steps. The panic everyone else felt echoed in Jasmine's eyes with a cold smile. Discussions grew intense, but Jasmine remained calm. And in that moment, The officers, who were only trying to understand Jasmine's soul, realized that the accusations made against this innocent woman were false, because they were blind to the fact that Jasmine was fully aware of everything and that all of this was a lie. When Jasmine entered the courtroom, she felt like nothing could happen. In fact, she was clear enough to bring everything to an end. And in the end, as the judge made statements, Jasmine calmly and confidently revealed her CIA badge. A chilling silence filled the courtroom, followed by tense moments. The difficulty was, perhaps, just a few seconds away from everything ending. The judge's eyes widened when he saw the CIA badge Jasmine pulled out, but the silence only intensified the tense atmosphere in the room. All eyes were on Jasmine. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. As the entire courtroom focused on her, Jasmine didn't say a word, simply rearranging the files in her hands. At that moment, every face in the room, every expression, was reshaped based on what Jasmine would do next. The DA and Brooks felt as if everything was falling apart. Seeing Jasmine's CIA badge meant that everything was over. Associating such a professional woman with a crime was their biggest mistake. Now they would pay for their errors. Brooks gripped his desk tightly, trying to release the tension in his body. But no matter how hard he tried, his body was still in panic. Dai's face had turned pale, the dark circles under his eyes more pronounced. They definitely couldn't handle this. Blaming Jasmine, making a move against her, would only drag them into a bigger disaster. Jasmine was observing every movement in the room, listening to each person's heartbeat. This wasn't just a game for her, it was a revenge, a fight for justice. And in this game, no one could win. Everyone would lose, and that was a fact. Now, gentlemen, do you know what the problem here is? Jasmine's voice echoed through the silence. Every person in the room who had been entirely focused on her listened intently to this sentence. The judge tilted his head slightly and began listening. "Please, Miss Carter." With a sly smile on her face, Jasmine scanned the room. Then she spoke slowly and sharply. "This case is not a misunderstanding. It was a crime. But no one will pay for such a big mistake, because the criminals are here, not in the courtroom, but outside. They are the ones who arrested me." In an instant, the DA began rifling through his files, realizing everything was slipping away. After hearing Jasmine's words, Brooks was left speechless. They realized how deep this was, how dangerously close they were to the edge. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a crime. After Jasmine revealed her CIA badge, the tension in the room only grew. Brooks swallowed hard. How do we explain this?" he asked, looking at Dai. Panic was evident in his eyes. In this situation, there was no way out. They had never imagined that Jasmine could be this powerful. They were used to holding all the power, controlling everything. Jasmine leaned back calmly, slightly tilting her head as she looked at the judge and the room. She chose her words carefully. "I've played others' games, but when their games are played against someone like me, everything changes." Then she lifted her head and looked at the room. In that moment, everyone realized Jasmine was not just a woman. She was a government agent, and this case wasn't just about covering up the crimes they had committed, but also the greatest insult to her identity and power. The way Jasmine stood, the confidence in her arms, the coolness in her eyes, captivated everyone in the room. Jasmine continued, carefully selecting each word. "This case is not just important for me, it's important for everyone who questions justice. Now, let's come together and not let anyone escape from justice." Jasmine's statement resonated in the minds of everyone in the room. No one could oppose her. In the courtroom, Jasmine was sending a message far beyond what a lawyer was supposed to do. This wasn't just her case. This was a war for the security and justice of society as a whole. The DA and Brooks tried to make sense of the confusion in their minds, but they would never succeed. At that moment, they realized Jasmine wasn't just a criminal. She was the woman behind everything, the one who upheld justice with her secret power, and now she was strong enough to bring it all to an end. As Jasmine's words echoed through the room, a cold sweat ran down D.A. and Brooks's backs. When Jasmine took off her CIA badge, all trust and ambition vanished in an instant. They were two seasoned lawyers who had spent their careers pursuing justice, trained to punish professional criminals. But here, Jasmine was far more than that. Before another second passed, Judge Harris slammed his fist on the table. Enough! If something is changing the course of this case, if it's to be explained, do it immediately. Jasmine's calm demeanor was even beginning to affect the judge. Jasmine stood up and, scanning the room with her eyes, spoke again. This is not just an infringement on my case. This is a breach of justice, a threat to security, and an assault on the highest levels of our nation's agencies. Every word hit its target like an arrow. Beyond being a CIA agent, Jasmine was planning to eradicate all this corruption and crime with sharp intellect. With every moment, she was fully aware of the power she held. Brooks found himself speechless, his hands holding his head as though all the blood had drained from his body. The once powerful man who had instilled fear in his rivals now sat trembling in fear. Dye, on the other hand, tightly closed his eyes and buried his head in his hands. He was at a loss for what to do. The moment they saw Jasmine's CIA badge, they realized they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. This case was a turning point that might cost them not just their jobs, but perhaps their entire careers. Jasmine, however, without losing her calm, looked around at the others in the room. "And now I ask," she said, "you've taken the right to defend not just me, but all of us. My arrest was not just about a crime against me. You hid the real criminals and helped them. But now, it's time to expose this corruption." Judge Harris took a deep breath. "This is a serious accusation, Miss Carter. But we still have time to verify it. We will carefully evaluate your situation," Jasmine responded with a slight nod. "You are aware this is not an evaluation, but a moment of decision. If you are part of justice, investigate the truth. Instead of punishing me, expose the real criminals." All eyes in the room were still on Jasmine. At that moment, everyone knew she was right, and something was about to change in a major way. This was not just an accusation, it was the exposure of corruption, conflicts of interest, and power games within the system. Jasmine was fighting for justice not just for herself, but for others as well, forcing everyone to face this dark truth and reminding them of their responsibilities. After a while, the judge's voice echoed in the room. "Jasmine Carter, as someone working in collaboration with the FBI and CIA, we will trace the origins of the charges against you. This is not just your victory. This is the victory of justice." Brooks and Dye were now sitting motionless, completely erased from the room. They had lost all their powerful positions. In that moment, they may have never felt so powerless. As Jasmine walked back to her desk, she did so not just as a lawyer, but as a woman who had control over everything. She knew that justice believed in her and that truth would always prevail. She didn't take a single step back, because she was the only one who was going to win this fight. And thus, Jasmine Carter's battle for justice would echo throughout the country, exposing not just her case, but all the dirty corners of the system. As Jasmine walked out of the courtroom, she realized the magnitude of the destruction she had left behind with every step. Everyone's eyes were on her, but in that moment there was neither pride nor anger. There was only a sense of peace, the sharp inner tranquility that justice had finally been served. Brooks and Dye, returning to the courtroom, were ignored by everyone. They were no longer the ones chasing justice. They were the ones blocking its path. As Jasmine's movements shone like a light, bringing an end to a dark period, it marked the moment these two men's careers were over. Jasmine showed what could happen when a strong lawyer recognized the fragility of a system. The decision was made. All charges against Jasmine Carter were dropped, and the injustices done to her were just the beginning. Those who had wronged her would pay the price. Brooks, for one last time, tried to swallow as he looked at Jasmine's back, but he stood frozen, unsure of what to do. As Jasmine exchanged a final glance with the judge and exited the courtroom, she reminded everyone of something we tend to forget. Every power, one day, will break. A week passed after the trial. Jasmine's victory was not only the beginning of a revolution that questioned not only criminal cases, but also a nation's justice system. Jasmine Carter had not only won a case, but she had also raised the flag of justice. And that day, the question directed at her was, "What will you do now?" She answered with her back straight and a smile, "We'll continue. Because this is just the beginning." She didn't look back, because she believed that nothing could stop her on the path she knew was right.